Hello everyone, good to see you again. We're going over another question in college algebra related to solving an inequality. Notice it's not an equation, there's no equal sign here. And it looks pretty darn complicated. You've got a whole bunch of fractions, and that really distracts people from understanding how to solve an inequality. So I have a recommendation all the time, and that is to remove the fractions. And a hint, just look at all the denominators. I see a 4 and a 3 and a 4. So the only different denominators you see are 3 and 4. Some of you who are really good with fractions, oh yeah, at least common multiple is 12. I'm going to multiply everything by 12. But just bear with me. I think it's really clever to keep each of the individual factors separated. If you multiply every term by those denominators, it will be equivalent and it will get rid of all the fractions. So let's look what happens here. I multiply this first, x plus 3 divided by 4, by 3 times 4, so multiplying by 12 essentially. Notice these 4's will cancel out, so you get rid of the fraction right away and you're left with 3 times x plus 3. Question you might ask, when do I change the direction of the inequality sign? It turns out the only time you do that is when you multiply or divide by a negative number. But clearly 3 times 4 is a positive 12, so you keep the direction of the sign pointing in the same direction. Make sure you do it to every single term to keep it equivalent. A lot of people will forget to multiply it by this 1/4. So you multiply 3 times 4 on both or every term. Notice the 3's cancel out here, you're left with 4 times x minus 2. Notice these 4's cancel out, so you can see what cancels out. It's kind of a nice visual. And you're left with 3 times 1, which is 3. This still looks a little scary. In some sense, you might say, well, you introduce these parentheses, but don't let the parentheses scare you. I put parentheses here so you realize that you're multiplying everything by that 12. You're not multiplying just the x by the 12. You're multiplying the x plus 3 by the 12. Be careful of the parentheses. They can be your friends. That always works. It helps you get the right answer every time. Now let's see what happens when we clean the parentheses. You get 3x plus 9 on the left side of the inequality. It's greater than or equal to 4x minus 5. Don't trip up. What happens when you have 4 times negative 2? You get negative 8. What's a negative 8 plus 3? It's a negative 5. Now, where did we start? Look at the question that we started with. It said solve this inequality for x. Look how ugly it is, and look how friendly that looks. They're equivalent, and that's the key. Get it into an equivalent form so you can solve the inequality. At this point, when you get here, many of you go in different directions. I personally, a lot of students will say, well, I like the bigger number of x's on the left side. It really is useful if you could read this two ways. So listen to this closely. This could be reading from left to right. 3x plus 9 is greater than or equal to 4x minus 5. But how nice would this have looked had it been 4x minus 5 is actually less than or equal to 3x plus 9. So that sometimes trips people up. You don't have to do this, but I like having more x's on the left and get my letters done on the left. To avoid that confusion, let's go back over here, keep it where it is. You know you're going to subtract x's. You're going to only have x's on one side. So subtract the 3x from both sides. What you do to the left, you do to the right. I know I'm going to have numbers on one side. So this minus 5, I'm going to add a 5 to cancel it out. So I add 5 here, I add 5 there to keep it balanced. You end up with 14 is greater than or equal to x. But again, that seems awkward. You're trying to find an x. So I say, or also known as, aka, x is less than or equal to 14. So you've solved the inequality. The question said, show me the solution in graphical form. So draw your number line. Put a filled-in circle, also known as a closed circle, above the 14. That means 14 actually works. If you plug 14 in here for x, it would make this statement exactly equal. It would make it true, but equal. But any value less than 14, to the left of 14, will also work. Notice the arrow goes on indefinitely, forever. Question didn't ask for it, but interval notation, just to go over it real quick, interval notation looks like an ordered pair, but it's not. The number on the right is the biggest solution you can have, which is 14. The number on the left is the smallest solution, which could be negative infinity. Now notice when you have a less than or equal to the underline, it leads to a closed or filled in circle, but also a bracket. The negative infinity doesn't have a bracket because you can't equal infinity, so you always have to put a parenthesis. But if you look at this, we reviewed a few good things. We looked at graphs on a number line. We looked at interval notation. What does the equal to mean with brackets and parentheses? We talked about how to tackle fractions. And we reminded you the only time you change the direction of the sign is if you multiply or divide by a negative. So I hope that helps. Keep trying hard. You can make this.